Welcome, everyone. For our first topic today, I want to take a big picture look at Donald Trump's trade wars, sort of what they mean to do, where we are today, with a particular focus on agriculture. We've spent a lot of time over the past few weeks reading about, looking at reports about the status of America's agriculture sector, the challenges that are resulting from Donald Trump's trade wars, and the potential bailout that the Trump administration has been promising. I want to start with a quote from Bob Bragg from Farm News and Views, who opened his podcast report the other day this way. Is it bad timing or bad karma as U.S. farmers have watched markets for both corn and soybeans tank? Last year, China purchased about 45% of all U.S. soybean exports and usually secures about 45% of its annual soybean needs by early October. But so far this fall, China has not yet purchased a single bean, end quote. Corn and soybeans are currently costing more to produce per bushel than they can earn on the market, and soybean farmers are beginning to scramble to store their excess production. Megan, I'll start with you. Can you give us a big picture understanding of how we got here?
Well, we got here because we are decoupling from China, and China is trying to use every lever it has in order to make it costly for the United States to do this. And the rare earths ban is part of this. And as is telling their people not to buy American soybeans, buy them from Brazil instead. I think that the rare earths is a lot more likely to be effective than saying don't buy U.S. soybeans. And the reason for this is
that happened this past week. Can you give people just an understanding of what that was, what the announcement was?
Yeah. So basically, China is cutting off exports of really important rare earths minerals that the United States uses for everything from batteries in electric cars to, there's munitions, there's all sorts of ways in which these things are really important. Now, it is important to note that these earths are not actually rare. What they are is disgusting to produce. When you leach these things out of the soil, you spew carcinogens into the air. They're really bad for the environment. If you look at what lithium mining looks like, it's really nasty stuff. It's stuff that the United States has not wanted on its shores. It's not that we couldn't do this. It's that it's hard to persuade people that they want to live near it. And so I think in the rare earths case, that's a real problem for the United States. And and look, the soybeans are a problem for U.S. soybean farmers in the short term. I think the issue with this strategy, and let us spin back to the 1970s, jumping in our time machine. All of us here on this podcast, alas, actually remember this decade, and alas, it is also 50 years ago, when the oil-producing countries in the Middle East decided that they had this really valuable thing, and they wanted to jack the price up. And they also, as a result of Israel's Yom Kippur War, wanted to put an embargo on selling oil to the United States and Israel. Didn't work. It actually did work. These are actually two separate actions. Arab oil embargo just failed. And the reason it failed is that commodities are fungible. And that is how you should think about the soybean issue, which is in the short term, not having the contracts you expected is a big issue. It is a huge disruption. My heart goes out to the soybean farmers who did their thing in the expectation that the usual would happen and are suffering a big blow right now. But in the long term, things just move, right? It's not like American soybeans are super special and only China can use them. When you don't sell them to China and they buy from somewhere else, you sell to the people that used to buy from somewhere else. The other issue, though, is the supply of things that really are in short supply. When you crack down on that supply, which is what happened with OPEC, the formation of OPEC, you do jack the price up. The problem with that is that when you jack the price up and you cut off supply and people are freaking out, which some of us may remember actually being in the car when our parents were waiting in line because the United States response, as part of our wage and price controls, was to control the price of gasoline, and then there wasn't enough gasoline. There were all these arcane rules where it was alternate days. If you had an odd number on your license plate, you could fill your tank on some days, and if you had an even number, you could fill it on other days. There were long lines. You would sit in the car with your parents and, in my case, read a book for hours while you waited to fill up. But in the long term, what that did was people freaked out and they said, well, if they were Europe, they said we need to jack up the price of energy and make our economy much more fuel efficient. But if you're America with your good old American know-how, you say we got to find some more oil. And that's what happened over the next 10 years. And by the mid 80s, the price had really gone down, and OPEC still had some pricing power because Saudi Arabia, which has the largest and cheapest reserves, kind of acted as the central banker. They would absorb the extra oil on the market by lowering their own production to keep the price somewhat elevated. But they lost a huge amount of their pricing power because it's simply not possible in a world where this stuff is actually pretty common to keep America from getting their hands on this in the long term. So while I do think that these are real issues, they're things that we should worry about, they're not issues that markets can't solve. And I expect that markets will solve them depending on the product, the short to medium term.
Kevin, one of the things that I would say Megan's argument rests on is an assumption that the markets will be allowed to operate. The challenge, I think, in part, is that just at the time that these industries, or let's say take soybean farmers, for example, look to adjust, the terms of the trade rules can change. I mean, Donald Trump has changed them many, many times since he took office. He announced on April 2nd, it's Liberation Day. He pulled some of those back. He seems to change his rules or his approach to tariffs from one day to the next. Doesn't that make it hard for market players to make the kinds of adjustments that Megan says will be necessary?
Yes and no. What's interesting about this round of the trade war is how much it's been influenced by the last round of the trade war in the first Trump administration. And the dumb trade policies of 2017 did something interesting. They managed to provoke a change in the underlying physical capital of the soybean market. So one of the reasons why there's soybean production in Brazil and Argentina is because they're in a different hemisphere from the United States, and they have harvests at different times, and soybeans don't store all that well. And the Chinese in 2017 didn't have a whole ton of soybean storage. And so over the next few years, they built 700 million tons worth of soybean storage, to the extent that they now have a third of the world's stored soybeans. Brazil added about 50% almost to its acreage dedicated to soybeans. Argentina's added quite a bit too. It's growing every year. Argentina grew 7% this year. Brazil grew, I think, 2% this year. So not only are soybeans fungible, they're more fungible than they were a while back because there are other people who have the capacity to produce more of them. And more important, the Chinese, who are the world's largest consumer of this stuff, have more capacity to store it. So in 2017, they were actually more dependent on U.S. exports than they wanted to be, and a lot more dependent than they are now. So yeah, people can adapt to this, but it's a question of what kind of adaptation and whether it's a sort of adaptation that is actually going to be of any use to American producers. American producers could do various things to make themselves more efficient and to raise their output, but they don't really want to do that because their view is that their output's too much already, and there's supposedly a glut in the market. I don't really believe in market gluts. I believe in prices going down, which is what happens when there's a lot of something. And the Chinese there's not a lot of human consumption of soy in China. It's there for animal feed, and mainly for animal feed. So it's not like there's a one-to-one, dollar per dollar price input for some consumer good in China that's going to go up when the price of soybeans goes up if they can't get their hands on supplies from the United States. It's one input of a whole bunch of factors that go into determining meat prices in China. And so it's not like consumers are going to feel a whole huge pinch anyway, even with the reduction. One of the other things about this situation that's sometimes misunderstood is that Chinese consumption of U.S. soybeans hasn't gone down because of tariffs. There is notionally a 35% or 34% tariff on U.S. soybeans, But it went to zero, and it went to zero in 24 hours because Beijing said no more American soybeans, and they're a single-party police state. And you can do that sort of thing when you're a single-party police state. They don't have to wait on prices to come into play to shape what that market looks like. They just say no more, and there's no more, and there'll be some more when they decide they've changed their mind about it. So they didn't pick soybeans out of a magic hat. They understand that farmers in the United States tend to be an important Republican constituency. And they are specifically putting this pressure on that market because it's an easy one for them to lean on, and one that they can cause just a tremendous amount of physical pain to, or economic pain to, because they're a third of the world's market for this stuff.
But if it wasn't directly because of tariffs, it was indirectly because of tariffs. I mean, that's because of
American
yet
tariffs.
Another move.
Yeah. So what happens is the United States puts tariffs on stuff, and prices go up, and consumption goes down.
Right.
In China, they put a tariff on American soybeans of whatever the number is. It could be 3%, it could be X gazillion D percent, and it wouldn't matter because there's just a policy that says no more American soybeans at any price, and that's how that works. So their tariff on American soybeans is symbolic because they simply don't allow them to be imported.
Yeah. I think I would point out though too is that like the way that's one way that the parallel to oil breaks down is it's not very storable. But also, like, soybeans, it's not like that's the only thing you can grow, right? Farmers can move into other crops. I do think that markets are going to adjust this. I also think probably the U.S. government is going to do a bailout of the farmers who are affected because that's how Trump has rolled.
As they did last time around.
Yeah.
Although there are some transaction costs there. Once a field is optimized for a particular crop, it does cost some money and time to do something else. And if I could just throw in one quick thing, Megan, one of my earliest political memories also is the gas lines. But you grew up on the Upper West Side. I grew up in West Texas, and it was particularly galling when there are pump jacks in the background taking oil out of the ground to not be able to buy oil products. That was weird, and a lot of people took note of that.
That's like when there are
Explains
lines
a lot about
for
your
H&H
political
Bagels
career.
on the Upper West Side. It's like, what the hell is this?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We were not members of the Lubbock Country Club, but there are pumps on the grounds of the country club in Lubbock, nice. So that's nicely symbolic.
Jonah, one of the things I think Kevin alluded to this, that I think the Chinese were hoping to do by sort of in effect banning U.S. soybean purchases was create this political pressure. I mean, Donald Trump was elected overwhelmingly with votes, or rural voters in the United States, including and especially farmers, supported Donald Trump overwhelmingly. And I think the understanding was that there would be political pressure brought to bear from those farmers. And that's maybe true. You're certainly hearing something about it. You can read a news article, read something in the New York Times, or watch something on ABC News, read these or listen to these farm podcasts, and there's no question that yes, farmers are in some ways frustrated at the effects of the trade war. But in sort of surveying what I've heard from Farm Bureau policy folks on their podcasts and talking to other people in the ag industry, they're sort of willing to give Donald Trump a long leash on this. They're willing to let him do this because he's telling them, and it's said many times, that what he's trying to do is create fairer trade, even if it's not immediately freer trade. Are you surprised that there hasn't been more public pressure, or that Trump has been able to sort of diffuse whatever pressure there has been simply by announcing that he's willing to do another bailout?
I'm more surprised that you're sitting around listening to Farm Bureau podcasts. That's the news of this podcast.
So actually, do you want to know? So no joke. I think I've listened to probably 8 to 10 hours of farm podcasts in the past couple weeks, and it's absolutely fascinating. And some of them are quite funny. There was a great little riff at the beginning of one of them about why bacon is God's most perfect food. And these guys were talking about how they added bacon to some sort of chicken macaroni and cheese dish, and that made what was otherwise a pretty mediocre dish really good because they added bacon. And the guy said the way you know that bacon is God's most perfect food is nobody ever talks about adding anything to bacon to make it better, because it's bacon, so you don't need to. Anyway, that's probably what I remember most about the the podcasts, but they've been interesting and entertaining. And I do think, I mean, it's interesting. I listened to a podcast from the Louisiana Farm Bureau from April, about a week after Trump announced Liberation Day. And I was struck by the fact that this policy director for the Louisiana Farm Bureau kept talking about getting calls from sort of mainstream media types who wanted him to say that farmers were really pissed at Trump. And he almost mocked them and said, in effect, yeah, look, I can't really say that. Like, they're not. They think it is time to make these markets fairer. Other countries have had tariffs on the United States on our exports for forever. Why shouldn't we do the same to even things out?
Yeah, look, I mean, so that's one of the reasons why I was more surprised by your podcast choices, because we've been here before. Like, I remember the New York Times had several pieces, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, about Trump's trade policies being bad for farmers and farmers being okay with it, to one extent. I mean, not liking it, but sort of saying it's time we got tough on China and all the usual talking points. And I think that it's what's funny about this in some ways is it is so undermining to this sort of the weak tea sort of Thomas Frank Marxist school of politics, which says, he always used to say the problem with American voters is they get their interests wrong. And the problem with that is people get to decide their own interests. And often they'll decide it on economic terms, but not always, right? I mean, there are lots of things that go on in American politics that are not about economics that people are very passionate about. What strikes me about all of this is that it's just so damn wasteful, right? I mean, it is a mass scale Bastiat's broken window fallacy, right? It's like we're just smashing a bunch of efficient systems in order to make it seem like we're creating new wealth and new opportunities, and I'm just not sold on any of it. The only arguments that have ever worked for me about curtailing trade with China are national security arguments. And if you can make a persuasive one on rare earths or wherever, then I'm with you. But the climate basically just now is being generated from the fact that Trump really thinks tariffs are cool, right? They're a dessert topping and a floor wax, and they're good for everything. And that's how he uses them, and it creates a climate of uncertainty. And I take Kevin and Megan's points well, but, like, commodities aren't like all commodities are fungible, but not all commodities are equally perishable. And
Sure.
You're going to have a situation where, like, by all means, soybean farmers can switch next year or the year after. They could also get stuck with a lot of rotten soybeans. And the idea that somehow this is part of some larger economic vision that's going to pay off, and what we haven't mentioned is, Trump did it again in his Knesset speech. He talks about how much richer we're getting because of the tariffs. And he thinks that therefore we can use some of the money from the tariffs to refund the farmers, which is just another way of saying the taxes I'm leveling on the American people in the name of protectionism, I'm going to use as my personal political slush fund to compensate the constituencies I don't want to be hurt by my hurtful policies. And at some point, there's going to be a reckoning in all of this, right? I mean, I don't know what it's going to be, but you cannot have a policy of personalist economic inefficiency indefinitely. Eventually, the stupidity of the arrangement is going to bear fruit or reveal itself in ways that people aren't going to like, and I just don't know how or when that is going to be.
Oh yeah, I'm not defending the tariff policies that led us here.
Oh, I know.
I am merely saying that, like, that this is, I think, not, it's bad. But the tariffs are bad because they're bad. They're not bad because China's not buying our soybeans, right? That they're bad for other reasons. It would be my only argument.
Yeah.
Well, and if you look at what you mentioned right at the outset, Megan, was this effort to decouple from China. I mean, I do think a lot of people on national security grounds, to Jonah's point, would say, yeah, well, this is long overdue. Should have happened a while ago. This might not be the right way to do it, but it's necessary to a certain extent. And I think the argument you'd get from Trump supporters, if you sort of take a step back and look at the way that he's approached issues like this over his now one term and 1 year, is that, yeah, the guy does things that are unconventional all the time. He gets people in Washington, D.C. and New York to squeal about his unconventional ways and the manner in which he does things. But sometimes they turn out pretty effective. You could say Trump came in and confronted NATO members on their insufficient defense budgets, and they've nearly all made significant increases. He demanded that Europe do more to support Ukraine. Europe is doing more to support Ukraine. He disregarded nearly everything Council on Foreign Relations types said he should do in the Middle East, and it produced the Abraham Accords and now this peace deal last week, or ceasefire that may lead to a peace deal last week. Don't they have a point that, like, yeah, he's unconventional. Yes, he doesn't do things the sort of traditional way, and while you all fret about the implications of tariffs, this is something that was necessary, and he's doing it.
Look, I will actually also argue that we need to decouple from China on stuff that is national security stuff. And that you can construe that broadly in some ways, right? What do we do about the fact that China manufactures most of the chemical precursors that go into pharmaceuticals, right? That's a big deal. And that's something that we need to think about. And it is actually, and one of the arguments that the Trump people make when you say, well, then, okay, but why tariffs on Vietnam? We should be friend-shoring stuff from China. If you want to move stuff out of China, you should be moving it to allies. And who want to take some of China's business. Let's help them do that. And they will say, because Chinese companies will just go and operate in those countries and then sell us stuff. And I think that that's actually a problem with trying to get these chemical precursors, is like you say, get them from India. Well, is India just going to turn around and buy the precursors from China and sell them to us? It's a real issue. But you know what? India also quite worried about China. These are issues that are solvable with by building alliances instead of just throwing your weight around. Right. And that's a real problem with Trump's approach, is that he doesn't just want to ring fence China. That is a project I will work with him on, because, like, in fact, our chief geostrategic rival should not be supplying stuff we need to put into weapons we might need to use to go fight our chief geostrategic rival. Nor do we want them to have enough economic power over us that we have to give them stuff because we can't afford the economic dislocations of, say, losing all our rare earths. I will also discuss that. But the way that you fix that problem is that you build a rival alliance of people who are trading within those blocks, who are committed to security. And by really getting those people on the same page, you think about Europe and Russian gas. There are ways to fix that problem.
Yep.
And Trump didn't do that because he really likes the optics of being seen to be able to just trash everyone, to just tell them this is the way it is, to bully and berate. And that is a good way for Donald Trump to feel like he's really kicking some ass and taking names. It is not a good way to solve our China problem.
Jonah, we're about 10 months in to Trump's second term. And 6-7 months into these new tariff policies, are we able to make a determination on the economic effects of this so far?
Less than I would have thought. I think that's fairness requires me to say that. I keep remembering how when the first episode of this podcast, when Sarah of blessed memory was still the moderator. She asked, okay, what's your prediction? How is this going to go? And we basically all said, hard to predict because we don't know if this is all going to stick around or something like that. But if these hold, prices will go up. Now, there are a whole bunch of people, Bill Maher and others, who've said that didn't happen. The economy wasn't wrecked like they said. And that's because Trump chickened out of a lot of the April Liberation Day tariffs. And then he started setting deadlines for other tariffs that gave time for the economy to pre-buy a ton of stuff, right? So they front-loaded a whole bunch of inventory that, when I say they, I mean businesses, large and small, front-loaded a huge amount of inventory and have been working that down since. That has kept the inflationary pressures or the price hiking pressures. Megan and Kevin are so much better qualified to get into this, but one of the real dorky debates is whether or not tariffs are inflationary or they just cause prices to rise, which is the kind of distinction that gets you really dirty looks from normal people and voters. Try to go to a town hall and say, it's not inflationary. Prices are just going to go up. And so anyway, the point is that the resiliency of the economy to the tariffs has been greater than I would have anticipated, in part because they got fair warning and in part because Trump backed off of a bunch of things, all the rest. At the same time, it is with the job revisions and everything else that we've seen, prices are going up. Inflation is not going down. It is, and I listen to the Marketplace podcast quite often, and all they do is interview different mid-sized business owners about the chaos this has thrown their lives in. I think the general climate of uncertainty has obviously been a wet blanket on more economic growth that we would have had, but it's going to be a little while before economists have anything like a consensus, even one-armed economists have anything like a real consensus about where the pressure points were, where the damage was. So much of this stuff is being sort of clouded over by the stock market rise, basically because of 7 tech companies. And you can imagine that when that punch bowl goes away, people start looking at the under the sea ballroom of the high school gym where they were drinking the punch and saying, good God, this place looks terrible. So I think it's been bad, but it hasn't been as bad as I would have expected.
Kevin, last word on this topic to you. Feel free to address anything that Jonah just said there about the economics of this, but I'm also interested in getting your thoughts on the politics of this. You had a piece for us a couple weeks ago looking at Democrats and their inability to make political hay out of this for Donald Trump. What's your understanding of how the politics of this play is it possible for Democrats, if they were to make better arguments than they're making, to peel away some of these rural voters that have been loyal to Donald Trump?
I think that rural voters are a hard get for a lot of cultural reasons, although rural voters aren't as Republican as people think they are. The last 3 presidential elections, it's been about 1 out of 3 rural voters voted for the Democrat, 2 out of 3 for the Republican. It's not as lopsided as people expect it to be. I think that the voters that they're able to get from these sort of things are voters who are already pretty well inclined to vote for Democrats, which are middle-ish income suburban voters with some education who are dealing with things right now like record beef prices and other persistent inflation in food prices and in prices of other things they actually buy. We have a big, complicated economy that's resilient, and price shocks don't play out the way people expect them to. And we have an economy that also is able just to weather a lot of stuff, like 50 years of really bad governance, which we've had, and the American economy just seems to keep trucking right along in various kinds of ways. And there's also enormous global demand for American stocks right now. You've seen a lot of money from overseas flowing into the U.S. stock market for all the obvious reasons, which has buoyed the wealth position of a lot of upper income and middle income Americans. So I think that if the Democrats knew how to talk about trade, there are a lot of smart things they could say, but they don't know how to talk about trade. And the reason for that is because they had Donald Trump's dumb views about trade as long as Donald Trump has had. There's a reason Joe Biden kept almost all of Trump's idiotic trade policies in place. You have Democrats who are essentially anti-corporate and anti-business, who don't like globalization for the same reasons that Republicans who don't like it talk about it the same way. And then you've got this sort of the general kind of New Deal class warfare aspect of internal Democratic politics. So you've got a few Democrats out there saying, hey, this trade stuff is really hurting some particular constituency in my district or in my state, and I sure wish we could do something about that. But you don't have any Democrats out there saying, well, what we need really is, more open and more liberal trade, and we need to deal with foreign policy issues and national security issues that are involved with trade from a foreign policy and national security point of view, not trying to deal with China by enacting a national sales tax on Americans who want to buy flip-flops, which is just a really dumb and indirect way to get to those problems. So, yeah, it would be nice if I keep telling Democratic politicians that I will buy all of them a subscription to The Economist if they'll just make that essentially their program. That's socially not where I want it to be. It's a bit to the left of where I am on a lot of issues, but that is pretty decent on, trade and fiscal probity and the rule of law and things like that. You can be that party if you want to. And for me, it seems like that's a natural place for them to land because those upper income, college educated, suburban and urban professionals who that kind of politics appeal to already either are Democrats or are trending Democratic. And that's where a lot of the low hanging fruit is for them. The idea that they're going to go out and, build a coalition based on farm voters is unlikely. Although there's room for some progress there, I think, too. And it's worth keeping in mind the Democratic Party was the rural and farmers party until really, really recently. I grew up not far from New Deal, Texas. There's a reason that town has that name, and but they just don't know how to talk about this stuff because they're so stuck in this 1960s, 1970s campus politics, class war, identity politics stuff that they don't know how to come out there and do the thing they always talk about, which is this, I hate the cliche kitchen table issues, but Bill Clinton made a lot of hay out of that stuff. He made a whole political career out of that stuff. It worked for them really, really well. And there's certainly room for some improvement there. And even though Trump had a really good year in the last election, there's a lot of close districts and states out there still. And even with all the gerrymandering and all that, you start adding 3-4% here or there, you're flipping some states. You're changing the way things play out in the Electoral College. But Democrats, fortunately for Republicans, are almost as dumb as the Republicans are.
Well, Trump has, I think, stolen their thunder on a lot of these issues. I had a conversation about just this a week or two ago with a very smart, longtime Republican consultant who said, if you want to understand sort of Donald Trump's policy agenda, go look at Dick Gephardt's run for president in 1988, and you'll find tremendous overlap. But I think there's a lot of truth to that. Jonah, I want to switch. I
believe I actually wrote that essay in the Dispatch, by the way, that Trump as Dick Gephardt.
The Gebhardt. I should read the stuff we publish at the Dispatch.
You should try that from time to time. Yeah.
Give you credit where you deserve it. Maybe he got that idea from you and from your piece.
I probably got it from him actually, but.
Jonah, I want to move to our second topic and sort of a big one, and it's looking at the sort of increased militarization of law enforcement across the country, or at least the increased perceptions of that. And we're recording this Thursday morning, and as luck would have it, we had a terrific morning dispatch this morning on exactly these issues, and I want to start by just reading the first paragraph of that. During the first 10 months of Donald Trump's presidency, the National Guard has been deployed or ordered to 5 U.S. cities. This started with Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. in June and August, respectively. At the start of October, National Guard troops deployed to 3 new cities, Memphis, Chicago, and Portland. And the long, very well-reported item goes on to detail the legal case that Donald Trump is making for this, the cultural argument that Trump is making for this, and sort of walking through what experts, national security experts in civil military affairs are saying about this. But I want to just start by taking a sort of a big step back and looking at perceptions of this. If you pay attention to the news, not that many people watch nightly news anymore, the evening network news, but if you do, you see these images of often masked U.S. troops, ICE agents. Sometimes the troops are in camos with big guns, walking through cities, throwing people on the ground, dodging bricks or things that are being thrown at them by protesters. And this feels like something that's very different than what we've seen in the recent past. I wonder if you think it is different. Is this dramatically different than what we've seen? And what's the Trump administration's long game here? What is Donald Trump trying to do by doing these things?
So I think it is different, and I think it's very frustrating to talk about. It's very frustrating to debate because you have so many different tracks of bad faith. And one of the only places where you get it to me, it is very reminiscent of the effort to steal the election in 2020, insofar as the things the goobers say at Four Seasons Landscaping or on Jesse Waters' show are at complete odds with the things lawyers will say in court. And thank God for courts, because they actually have this rule that if you lie to a judge or you make bad faith arguments, you can get in a lot of trouble. And so it tends to make lawyers in court, not on TV, but in court, kind of honest, because they don't want to lose their license and they don't want to get sanctioned and they want to protect their reputation. And and so there's not a lot of insurrection talk inside courtrooms. There's a lot of insurrection talk on TV. There's a lot of insurrection talk from the Oval Office, which is wildly irresponsible. Pam Bondi now is, saying that Antifa is no different than MS-13, that the No Kings rally thing is, wink, wink, nod, nod, maybe a terrorist network. There's an incredible amount of irresponsible rhetoric out there that I think we have not seen before, not at this level. And if we have seen it before, we didn't have the kind of communication infrastructure that would make it as bad, right? Who knows what Andrew Jackson said to a room full of 50 people. But Andrew Jackson with social media is a different thing. So in terms of the motives, to borrow the title of Nick Catoggio's newsletter, I think a lot of it is a boiling frog thing.
Explain that. What do you mean by that?
Well, so first of all, in real life, this is not true, but apocryphally, the idea is if you throw a frog into a pot of boiling water, it'll jump out to save itself. But if you put a frog in a cold pot of water and you slowly turn up the heat, it won't notice and it'll boil to death. Again, not true, but figuratively, the idea is, what I mean by that is Trump talks about so much stuff. There's so many things that Trump would talk about a lot to normalize the idea, to incept it into people's heads. He did this with the election stuff. Well, if it's, I won't question the outcome if I win, but if I lose, it's probably going to be because they stole it, because there's no way I can lose without them stealing it. And he would say that over and over again. He would get his useful people, his surrogates to say the same thing over and over and over again. They would build up this permission structure, this environment, all this kind of stuff, so that when he finally did it, everyone was like, well, he said he would do it, and you weren't as outraged by it. I think by the time he actually invokes the Insurrection Act, and there are very few Trump watchers I know left who don't think he eventually will, I think a lot of people are going to be like, wait, didn't he do that already? Right? Because that was the point of sending the troops into D.C., That's the point of getting them to go into Memphis. That's why he didn't initially send them into Chicago, because he couldn't get the court. He couldn't hit the legal threshold. But he keeps talking about it. He keeps dipping his toe and then his ankle. And eventually he's going to call for the Insurrection Act. Where I'm cloudier in my own opinion about this is what the end game is, to get to your question. There are people of good faith who think it's all, the road to autocracy and all of that stuff. And we talked about this on The Remnant, Steve, this week. Even if I don't believe that at 100%, what percentage am I supposed to believe that until I have to take it seriously, right? If it's a 10% chance that's true, should I be freaking out? Is there a 20% chance that's true? 50%? I don't know. I think that part of it, but one of the reasons why it's murky is Trump likes the appearance of being a strong man so much more than the actual work that goes into being a strong man. And so if he can get the headlines, if he can get the praise, if he can get the credit for something, I don't think he cares that much about the substance. He just wants people to think it. And so he didn't end crime for all time in Washington, D.C., but he likes that people think that. He likes to think that. And so it's entirely possible that a lot of this is performative and atmospheric rather than with some really nefarious endgame. The opposite scenario, which again is short of autocracy, is he's looking for a pretext to send troops into major urban areas in advance of the midterm elections to intimidate voting and to claim certain votes were invalid and seize the voting machines or who knows what else. But I think people always forget that, like, one of the things Trump does not have concrete plans all the time. What he likes is the idea of having his options. And so to the extent he has a plan to be an autocrat, it's a plan to have that be an option if and when he needs it, rather than a hard, like, this is, and then I will seize the radio stations and rule for 1,000 years kind of thing. I've always said that the best, everyone wants to do the whole, is he Hitler thing? He's not Hitler, right? But Juan Perón is sort of my choice, insofar as Juan Perón really liked the pageantry and aesthetics of fascism. He just didn't want to have all the drama of killing a lot of people and and pissing off all the oligarchs and all that kind of stuff. He just wanted everyone to praise him and say he was a strong man. He didn't want to do the work. And I think there's something of that in Trump as well. And what bothers me is when I say this, people say, "Oh, you're defending him." And I'm saying, no, I think he could be doing 80% less of what he's doing, and people should be more freaked out and more pissed off than they are. But at the same time, I don't think people should lose their minds quite yet. And so it's very murky for me to figure out exactly what the end goal is, because I don't think he has one.
So, Megan, if I mean, I'm not sure I'm as reassured as Jonah maybe wants me to be by the Juan Perón comparison. But if Donald Trump doesn't,
Melania would look great on some balconies saying "Don't cry for me, Washington D.C." By the
way, if
don't cry for me, Estonia, right?
Slovenia,
yes. Megan, if we don't know, if we can't determine whether Donald Trump has these plans, and I do think I've done this before, I'll do it again now. I point to the period between the November 2020 election and when he finally left office as a good indication of what he's willing to do. That period took us from theoretical to very practical. And, according to Mark Esper, he wanted to shoot protesters in the legs. He wanted to seize ballot boxes. He wanted the military deployed in the streets across the country. So again, I don't think this is any longer theoretical, but let's assume that we can't assign a big plan. That Donald Trump doesn't have a long-term strategy on this. It seems to me that Stephen Miller does, that other people around him probably do. And Donald Trump often does what Stephen Miller wants him to do. And if you look at just the rhetoric that Stephen Miller has been using to describe what I would consider to be, and I say this as somebody with a 30-year history of criticizing lefty nonprofit groups, but not terribly violent left-wing groups. They're reorganizing the IRS to go after left-wing groups. They're talking about George Soros as a terrorist. If it's Stephen Miller and others who have these plans, Should we be reassured that Donald Trump himself doesn't want to do this or doesn't yet know if he wants to do this?
A little bit, I think, yes, because Donald Trump is whimsical. You can be a Donald Trump advisor, you can have his ear, and then 10 minutes later, you do something that makes him feel embarrassed and you're gone, right? Now, do I think that this should already have happened to Stephen Miller? Long ere these days we now find ourselves in, yes. But I do think that it matters that Trump has authoritarian instincts, does not have a plan, does not have the self-discipline. And this is why, like, I've now spent 10 years being yelled at by lefties who are like, why won't you point out the parallels to Hitler? Why are you dismissing these? And it's like, look, first of all, we're now, depending on how you want to count, 10 or 5 years into Trump's reign. At this point, on the most conservative estimate, Hitler had full control of the German government, had made the Hitler Youth compulsory, he had militias, that he was well underway with his campaign of persecuting the Jews, and he was preparing to annex Austria. At a similar point in his career, Trump is wrestling with the district court for control of the Oregon National Guard, right? And I think that it's not just what are his instincts, it's also that our institutions are a lot stronger. That said, and I think the reason not to say that Trump is Hitler is that then, or he might be Hitler, or we're getting close to Hitler, is that then a year in, people look around and they're like, it still doesn't look a lot like Nazi Germany. And you are losing your ability to make the arguments about the things that are terrible and that matter and that are much worse in his second term than they were in the first. And look, I have friends who were never Trump in 2016, voted for him in 2024 for a bunch of reasons and figured it would be like his first term. And I was like, where his first term was going, not a good direction, right? But they thought he would be more constrained than he was. And the answer is that the people around him spent 4 years building and executing a plan. I think what he's doing is terrible on a number of levels and does actually reflect the tendency of his first term, right? Is to push. Just try a little bit, see how far you can go. I think at the moment, though, he really is still stopped by the Supreme Court in ways that are, he could try to pack his own court, I guess, but the Supreme Court's not going to let him invoke the Insurrection Act and start collecting ballot boxes from cities. They are not going to allow that. Now, he could just say they have made their order, let them enforce it. But that's a constitutional crisis of a different time, and I think there are probably some voters who would get off the bus at that point, right? Who would be more suspicious. Right now, he is legitimizing these things by fighting crime, which people really hate and which Democrats really did let get out of control. And which Democrats also just more broadly got on the wrong side of, right? It's not just that progressive cities could have run their police departments better. It's that you had a bunch that Democrats did not shut down fast and hard enough the people who were saying defund the police, and associate institutions that are heavily associated in the public mind with the Democratic Party, like the mainstream media, did not do that. And instead, like NPR is running a kind of fawning interview with a woman who wrote a book in defense of looting, right? Bad look, guys. And so I think people are pretty suspicious of Democrats on this issue. And so when Trump sends troops into cities, a lot of people who don't really have like a strong sense of democratic institutions as being more than I get to vote for president or I get to vote for my congressman, right? That's how most people think about democracy. All of the kind of complicated norms and institution stuff, most people don't think that hard about it. But I do think that if he really tries to go in and interfere with elections in a blatant way, like that's the part of democracy that Americans really understand. Is like, I get to vote for president. And I think that the Supreme Court will slap it down, and I think he will not have as much freedom to move as they hope if he tries something like that. That said, all of this is really bad. It is worrying in its own right. We are
Yeah, so-
legitimizing things that should not be legitimized. We are breaking institutions that we need. And like these things are bad enough in themselves. We are in a bad, bad place. We have masked agents running around like they're friggin', Western banditos, throwing people to the ground, treating them like they're hardened terrorists when they're like trying to sell their landscaping services in the Walmart parking lot. That is, and legitimizing that kind of use of real abuse of law enforcement power. One of the things that is most disturbing to me is the way the ICE agents act against people who are not really resisting them, right? Like they're yelling at them. And I'm sorry you don't like being yelled at. I don't like being yelled at either. And like my job is to get yelled at on the internet all day. But that's not an excuse for some of the stuff I've seen. Similarly, the masks, look, the DEA agents, I actually get why they wear masks. The cartels will put hits on DEA agents. The landscapers in the Walmart parking lot don't have those kinds of connections. You do not need to dress up like a bank robber to arrest those people. And that legitimization of a force of people who are above the law, who have no accountability, that's super worrying. You want to mask them, you got to put their names, their badge numbers, whatever it is, like right front and center. I want it on the mask, right? If that's your excuse that you need to avoid. And I think that there needs to be the idea that they're creating this state that has less and less accountability is itself worrying. And I think, unfortunately, something that is hard to explain how these tiny incremental things to an ordinary voter who's just got other stuff to do and is not deep in the history of authoritarian regimes and never will be.
So just two quick points on that. Just because the nerd in me will not let it go without pointing out that not only was Hitler trying to annex Austria, but Austria wanted to be annexed.
Fair enough.
Which
Fair enough. It was
Well, that's my point, right?
consenting.
Yeah, and on the people who voted, the anti-Trump people who voted for Trump in 2024, it's one of the very few things I've been right about, which was that I kept saying to these people, and I said it on various podcasts, that if your best case scenario is also your most likely scenario, your analysis is probably wrong, right? And they thought the best case scenario was that Trump was going to be just like the first term, and that was the most likely one. And it turned out that they were absolutely wrong about that. Where I was wrong on this stuff is like I really didn't think Trump would have it in him logistically, political will wise. I didn't think the American people would tolerate it. The idea of dragging people off the street and throwing them in vans the way they are tolerating it. I'm not saying everyone likes it, but they don't dislike it so much that it's causing the kind of outrage that is causing Republicans to back off or anything. And that's kind of shameful. In some cases, it's extremely shameful. But I think part of it is to get to Megan's point about people are tuning out politics to a massive degree. They resent the way Trump tries to occupy their headspace, whether they like him, his policies or not. They're just tuning it out, right? And I think we're not here, thank God, talking about the government shutdown. But that's one of the reasons I think why Republicans are getting more blame than Republicans thought they would for the government shutdown. It is obviously Chuck Schumer's fault. It is obviously the Democrats who have started the shutdown. But the body language of this administration for the shutdown is pro-shutdown, and the body language of this administration for 9 months is pro-chaos and disorder and all the rest. And so when you tell normies who have tuned out politics that this latest dysfunction in Washington is actually not Trump's fault, they're like, yeah, right. And I think that that's sort of one of the things that I think people who are very plugged into politics cannot comprehend normal people not being very plugged into politics. And it really blows up their analysis from time to time.
So, Kevin, I don't necessarily agree with Jonah that Republicans are sort of losing the PR fight over the shutdown. I think actually they're doing pretty well. But like Jonah, I agree
I'm just saying
with
that
Jonah.
the polling shows that people blame Republicans slightly more than Democrats, which they shouldn't if you're just paying attention to the actual details.
I think it's even depending on how the polling question's asked. I think Republicans are doing well, in part because Trump was able to do things like go to the Middle East and get a lot of attention that shows him being president, shows him at least, he's functioning if the government more broadly isn't. But like Jonah, I don't want to get involved into a deep discussion about the shutdown. But Kevin, I guess my question is a little bit slightly different view than the one that Megan and Joan are describing with normies. I think it is true that part of the reason that this is not more alarming to people is because there are people who have just checked out. They're living their lives. They're not paying attention to this. But isn't it also partly a problem of our siloed media? I mean, some people just aren't being confronted with the facts of what's happening with ICE. I mean, if you watch Fox News, you see video of protesters throwing things at ICE agents, and you hear stories about the threats to ICE agents. And I think some of those threats are real. I mean, as Megan said, I think the cartel stuff is real. If you, on the other hand, consume a different kind of media, you're seeing all sorts of videos of these masked agents throwing people to the ground, many of whom turn out to be U.S. citizens. They haven't committed any violations, and it's basically a competition of differing realities or differing perceptions. Does that contribute to this? And if people could see sort of what's happening, would they be more alarmed?
No, in fact, I completely reject the premise of your question. It's not that people don't know what's going on. It's easy to find out what's going on in the world. If you're curious about what's going on in the world, it's a golden age of consumption of raw data and media and such. The problem is people like it. Americans like this authoritarian stuff. They like the displays of masked men walking around in the streets, as long as the perception is it's hurting their enemies and the people they hate. This isn't something that's being done to the American people. It's something that a substantial number of the American people celebrate and embrace and love. This guy tried to overthrow the government of the United States in 2021, and the same people who elected him the last time elected him this time. I don't have any hair to pull out, but sometimes my colleagues here, I very rarely strongly have very strong disagreements with you. But when I hear Jonah saying, like, well, there's X percent that he's going to be, an authoritarian or an autocrat or something, there's 100% because he's already that guy. He's already using every aspect of the federal government that he can to punish his enemies, reward his friends, and engage in open corruption. And it's not true that he doesn't have a plan. That is his plan. It's to take every opportunity to hurt the people he hates on behalf of the people who want to see those people hurt and to reward his friends and cronies. That's the whole plan.
Okay, and I will respond to that, but go on.
The question isn't whether he's going to be an autocrat. The question really is, when he starts giving illegal orders to law enforcement and the military, how many elements of those organizations are going to obey and go along with him? And then what do we do? What do we do when there's a mob of 100,000 people surrounding the Capitol or the White House, Donald Trump saying, I'm still the president, and some elements of law enforcement and the military backing him?
So, we may just have a definitional crisis here. When I hear people say he's going to be an autocrat, I hear them saying he's going to be like Putin and he's going to have his political enemies thrown out windows and and things other than defenestration. That that it's going to be the selective use of violence to maintain control and to work his will, right? I agree with you that he tried to steal an election on January 6th. He has not done any, if the definition of autocrat is extrajudicial, extra-constitutional violence and appropriation, he has not done that.
Of course he has.
Well,
You've seen violent. I saw a Presbyterian minister get shot in the face with a pepper ball by an ICE agent just the other day for protesting. Guy in
fair
collar.
enough. Okay, look, fair enough. Like, he did not say,
The
go get that
emergency
Presbyterian
is here.
minister.
We're not waiting for the emergency to get here. The emergency is already here.
My point was less about. My point was not that he wouldn't want to be, or that he would not see. My point had nothing to do with his good character.
Sure, I know.
Right. It has to do with the fact of that the work required to defy courts, the risk reward for him it's just not worth the effort, at least not yet. Right. Mm-hmm. If the stakes get down to another January 6th type moment where he thinks, what do I have to lose? I do not put it past him. And then I do worry about the things that you're talking about.
Yeah, one of my favorite Jonah Goldberg lines is that, of course, Trump isn't Hitler. Hitler could have got rid of Obamacare.
Right.
But the fact that we have a lazy and stupid autocrat doesn't mean that we don't have an autocrat. It means we have a lazy and stupid autocrat.
Fair. I would just simply say that the question of what he can only actually be. I'm not talking about autocrat in his heart, right? I'm talking about he cannot operate like the kind of autocrat that people are when they compare him to Putin. Never mind Hitler, right? That kind of stuff. That requires the things that you're talking about. Will people follow his orders? And part of the problem with Trump is he's a coward. And so he'll say things like, I saw him, he was saying in the Oval Office yesterday, I hope they look at Shifty Schiff and all these other people. I hope they do this. I hope they do that, right? He doesn't want to be seen in public actually ordering the things that he wants done. He's passive-aggressive about it. And that's bad enough. And we were saying earlier, like, if it's 10% of one per own, people should be freaking out. I was just writing yesterday about, Edmund Burke used to say this wonderful thing about Americans, about how they would spot the whiff of threats to freedom, far on the distant horizon, and they would snuff them out in their infancy, just on principle. Mm-hmm. We're not those people anymore. And it pisses me off. And that doesn't mean that necessarily we're a totalitarian or authoritarian state yet, but it used to be that if we were one toe over the line towards that, people would lose their minds. I would much rather live in that country than the country we're in now, where you and I are arguing about, like, well, it depends what you mean by authoritarian, and
yeah,
that's messed up.
Yeah,
I think maybe we can embrace the healing pair of "and" here. That we can square this circle, bring us all back into harmony by saying Trump has autocratic instincts and is attempting to do autocratic things, I think, often at the behest of people in his administration who have a much clearer idea of wishing, of what they would like their autocracy to look like. He does not yet have autocratic powers where he can just act without fear of constraint. Now, look, even autocrats are a little bit constrained. I love Bruce Bueno de Mesquita talking about how, even Hitler was afraid of the Junkerfrau, right? You still had to be making kitchenware at the height of World War II because you couldn't let those German housewives not have the cooking pots they needed. But I'm
not sure you're right about that, Megan.
He is still constrained in a way. Now, would he like to get rid of those constraints? There's kind of an empirical question, can he? And I think I am still on the side of he can't. I'm still on the side of, like, really going for the gusto and deploying troops against American citizens there is a reason that they mostly have used these troop deployments as a cover for ICE operations. Because the sad truth is people don't care as much if you violate the rights of non-American citizens and people who are here illegally. I'm still on the side of probably he can't, but I don't want to be guessing. I shouldn't have to guess.
I'm not even sure you're right about that, though, in the sense that take the TikTok thing. Seems like a minor thing, but there is a law that says this company has to go away. Trump ignored the law with impunity, continues to, because he's got a buddy who's an investor in TikTok, and because he cares about social media, and because he wanted to hold it out there as a plum to use as reward for people to potentially support him. And he got away with it, right? He just said, well, it's the law, sure, but I'm the president, so screw it.
I'm against this, but I put that in the bucket of actually pretty normal politics. Shall we go through the ways in which Joe Biden was like, sure, I can't legally forgive all the student loans, but here is my 80th legal argument for doing something that I can't. Or Obama's DACA order, I can't do this, but now I guess I can. Right?
Sure, and we can find presidents breaking the law and ignoring it all the way back to, Andrew Jackson and before.
Yeah.
But whatever Joe Biden did, whatever Barack Obama did, we have a guy who's already once tried to overthrow the government with troops in the street, ignoring the law. This is a bad combination. And this doesn't really leave a lot of room, I think, a wiggle room for, well, what are the chances he turns out really bad?
It also doesn't buy a lot of goodwill for Trump, right? I mean, that's part of the problem, where I'm more on Team Kevin on this. I get really, really frustrated listening to some conservatives who I generally agree with on a issue to issue kind of basis, but who will cabin different things that Trump's doing as if they're not part of a broader mosaic.
You have
right?
to look at the whole thing. Yes, exactly.
Like, he has every right
easier.
to get
It's a
rid of
dodge.
the inspectors general at the Pentagon,
No.
right?
But
It was
I'm just saying the TikTok deal, while bad, is actually a very normal kind of bad. And I think that you do have to think about, who else liked dogs kind of accusation of like, yes, he is doing when he is doing normal bad president stuff, I am inclined to not try to weave that in, because I think then you very quickly get it bogged down in arguments about, well, what about Joe Biden? He's doing a bunch of stuff that Joe Biden didn't do. Let's focus on that, right?
The
we
whole
need
trade
to
war
step
thing is
in.
based on essentially no legal authority. Go ahead, please.
I need to step in because we are slowly running out of time and we're going to lose Megan. I'm
Not in our hearts.
This conversation will continue. We will
May
be
my memory
revisiting
be a
this
blessing.
from time to time. Not worth your time today. I was looking for something that would cause Jonah to wince, as he has in the past when he doesn't like my not worth your time.
You mean when you're
suggestions.
not worth your time, suggestions are bad, when I wince. But anyway, go on.
I mean, in your view. I'm not sure that this one fits today, but I want to start with Megan because she's got to run. As I look at this group here, we're all pretty old. As Megan pointed out, we were all around in the 1970s. We have memories that maybe some of our listeners don't. And we've been writing for more than 100 years collectively. That's a lot of pieces, blog posts, what have you. Sometimes long before publication when something you've written is going to hit. People are going to pay attention to it. People are going to share it with friends. It's going to be a thing. It'll generate discussion, whether it's a reported piece or what have you. Other times you just crank something out to finish it and you're surprised that it has the life that it has. And my question to you all over the course of these long careers that we've each had, what piece have you written where the reaction to it has surprised you most? Maybe it was something you just sort of dashed off in an hour and it got a lot of pickup. Maybe it was something that you reported that you thought people wouldn't find interesting. Anyway, Megan, I'll start with you.
The most read thing I have ever written was written in 10 minutes while squatting on the floor of a train station. It
was a bomb threat.
It went my confession to the murder of it was actually when Osama bin Laden was killed. This post went this Martin Luther King quote went viral, and I was looking at this. A weird thing about me is that I'm pretty good at spotting fakes, and I don't know how I do it. I just look at fake quotes and I somehow know that they're fake. I'm not 100%, I don't want to say, but I have a much higher than normal batting average on this stuff. And I looked at this quote and I was like, that does not sound right. There is something wrong with that quote. It was a little too on the nose. It was like, I will not, I hate evil, but I will not mourn the death of anyone, not even an enemy. And I was like, this is just a little too on the nose. He's writing from the CNN green room. And so I very quickly looked through his speeches, tried to find it, the quote was nowhere. And so I wrote a really quick blog post saying this looks like it's fake. It had already gone viral because Penn Jillette had tweeted it. And so basically what happened was people kept pasting the fake quote to Facebook or Twitter or some other social media. And then people would immediately post a reply that was my thing. And so I got like millions of views on this 10-minute blog post. And that, I guess, is going to be my legacy to history.
Kevin?
Yeah, it's maddening. I will sometimes go and work really, really hard on a piece that'll just kind of, sink under the waves with barely a ripple. When I was at National Review, by far the most read thing I wrote was a little piece that I wrote probably in 10 minutes, like Megan was saying, maybe less, about how people like Anthony Scaramucci all talk like they just watched Glengarry Glen Ross for the 60th time.
That was a great piece.
Well,
Was
it was a little dashed off thing, and something like 2 million people read that in the course of a few days, and which is not normal for my stuff. I find that the tragedy of my writing career is that I want to be Tom Wolfe, but I'm Don Rickles, and I'm good at insults. And it's not just the haircut, it's the whole Rickles thing. And so people really respond to pieces I write that are, insulting. I wrote this, kind of these bookends of the first Trump administration. The first one was Witless Ape rides escalator, and then the last one was Witless Ape rides helicopter. And those were both super, super popular. In fact, they had me on Morning Joe for the second one, and it was the weirdest television appearance I've ever done because I came on, and Mika started just reading the piece, and then she just read the whole piece, and then that was the end of the segment, and I didn't say anything. Thank you.
They just wanted you there for eye candy.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm the guy you get for that, and yeah, so it's actually a little bit depressing. I'm sure you guys are running this too, where you actually go out and do reporting and interviews and stuff, and do all the hard kind of journalism. And sometimes those pieces have a long tail, and people will still read them and talk about them a long time later. And I've had some of those too. But in terms of the stuff that really just snaps and crackles and pops, yeah, it's me saying that Stephen Miller is a mayonnaise addicted Nosferatu.
Jonah, you haven't done a lot of actual reporting.
I have not.
But undoubtedly, you've had these experiences.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the one that fits sort of what Megan and Kevin have been talking about would be a dashed off blog post title. You can still find it, called To Hell With You People. And it was, I want to say it was in the middle of, like, I could be misremembering, but it was like the 2013 government shutdown or something like that. And we had just been through the Jared Loughner, Gabby Gifford shooting.
Yeah.
Where everybody and their sister insisted that violent rhetoric, I mean, some of these arguments are not new, right? That's why the Charlie Kirk debate was kind of fresh, or one of the reasons why it was frustrating. But everyone, Paul Krugman talking about eliminationist rhetoric, and Sarah Palin was responsible because she had put target symbols on a congressional map. And I'd written a bunch about it. A lot of people had written a bunch about it. And the sanctimony and the basically blood libel that people were using had really pissed me off, but I thought the debate was over. And then I start watching this thing on Today Show about how Republicans are hostage takers and they're like Hamas because they're holding the government, they're terrorists and all this kind of stuff. And I just banged out this thing about, to hell with you people. You've been telling me all this time about how dangerous violent rhetoric is, and the second it's useful to you, you're using it. And it was one of those just like hypocrisy policing things. And I remember talking to Rich Lowry about it, how they'd never seen, we used to have that software with Chartbeat where you could watch as you got the link, and it just went nuts on social media. But that's not the one I really wanted to talk about. The one when you asked the question that came to mind very quickly was, because I often talk about this when I talk to people about the dangers, that one of the things that people don't appreciate is how much a lot of writers are afraid of their audiences and don't want to piss off their audiences. And that's like the gateway drug to audience capture. And I once wrote a piece, I saw some amazing statistic that feral cats, basically just street cats, are responsible, I'm directionally right about these numbers, are responsible for something like 500 million bird deaths in Minnesota alone. I mean, like the amount of birds it's staggering amount of birds that feral cats kill. Just staggering. And I sort of wrote a tongue-in-cheeky kind of column where I use the Shakespeare quote about first kill all the lawyers, and the headline was like first kill all the cats. I'm actually not in favor of killing all the cats, but I do think, like spayed and neutering these things makes a lot of sense. And I thought it was just sort of like, I thought the statistics alone were enough for 750 word newspaper column, because it was a syndicated column. And just making the point that, these things are not just cute and fuzzy things, that they have consequences for the environment or whatever. And I can't even remember what my larger argument was. I got in and buried with outrage from the cat lobby. The cat lobby, like, guys were like,
they can be intense.
Well, I remember one guy saying,
guys,
all right,
the cat lobby of guys, you're saying?
Yeah, that was like, that was the thing that shocked me. It was like also dudes. And there's this one guy who like literally said, with lots of MFers and all that kind of stuff in it, all right, if you feel so strongly about cats, the next time the birds shit all over my truck, you better come out here and clean it for me. Right? He wanted to kill he didn't want to kill the cats because he wanted to kill all the birds because they crapped on his car. And but people just lost their minds. And and to this day, like, whenever I talk about this or write about this or reference it, I'm always like, and my cat-loving readers, I have nothing but deep respect for you, and I love all cats, and I wish them no harm, because I'm terrified of these people. And I've written things about Islamic terrorism where the response didn't scare me as much as this thing about cats. So there you have it.
Are you comparing
definitely not
cat
getting
owners to pro
wedding.
jihadis? Yeah, you're going to get so much feedback from this conversation.
I do not want to kill all the cats. Just want to be clear about that.
How many?
So I have one. Mine, I think, Jonah, I'm pretty sure you've heard the story. I don't think I've told it here before, but it's very much along the lines of what Kevin was saying. I think I had just, if I'm remembering this correctly, I had just come off a long, months-long reporting effort on Yucca Mountain, which was this place in rural Nevada where they
For the record, I did reporting from Yucca Mountain as well, so I did do some reporting. But anyway, go on.
It's good. There and Anwar, your two reported pieces ever.
That's like 50% of them.
But I learned the science. I spent endless hours reporting on this Yucca Mountain piece. We went and wrote a big cover story for the Weekly Standard on Yucca Mountain and the risks, and talked to risk analysts. Scientists went and toured the place. I even, to sort of sexy up the piece, visited a local brothel outside of Yucca Mountain that was sort of my attempt at making this a YIMBY story. Yes, in my backyard story, because the local...
That cost extra at the brothel.
The local prostitutes wanted the business. So while a lot of people in Nevada were saying no, they were saying, yes, please do this.
They get paid.
So I did all this reporting. I thought this was going to be a huge, like a definitive Yucca Mountain story. And, I don't know, I got like some letter from a PhD at Yale who was a specialist in nuclear waste, and like no other discernible response at all. And then a short time later, I got an email from my friend Matt Labash, also at the Weekly Standard at the time. We used to have a column at the beginning of the Weekly Standard called The Casual, and you could use it to write about whatever you wanted to write about. It didn't matter. It's just sort of observations about culture or something in your life or color for characters, what have you. And Matt was assigned to The Casual for that week. The due date was Wednesday, and he sent me an email. I think it was, Tuesday afternoon, saying, hey, I'm really, really sick. I'm not going to be able to do The Casual. Can you write it for me? And so I had, less than 24 hours to come up with an idea, execute it, and crank it out. I didn't know what I was going to write, so I sent a note to some of my buddies in the area. I was living in Northern Virginia at the time, and said, hey, I need to come up with an idea for this column. If you guys will go out and get some beers with me and help me brainstorm, I'll buy the beers. So we went out in, like the Ballston area, Roslyn area of Northern Virginia. This is in Arlington. And we walked around to various bars. We sort of had a beer at one, went to another, had a beer at that place, went to another. And we talked about the things I could write about. And over the course of that evening, the thing that I observed was that all of these places had signs advertising old school Wisconsin beers, but none of them at the time served the old school Wisconsin beers. So they'd have signs advertising Pabst Blue Ribbon or Schlitz or Hams or what have you, and none of them actually sold the beer. So I actually got home that night and started a rant about how frustrating this was, that they had these signs and were advertising on the coolness of old school Wisconsin beers, but didn't actually sell the old school Wisconsin beers. And this was before sort of Pabst made its big comeback, Schlitz made its big comeback. You could potentially tie those later comebacks to my writing this article.
If you
But
say
I
so
proposed at the end of the thing, I'm like, look, go to a grocery store, buy a case of Pabst, sell each one for $1, and you will have doubled your money, something like that. And it really was sort of the definition of a throwaway piece. Like, we had to fill the space in the magazine, so I did this, and we got, I can't remember exactly how many actual letters, but we got letters and emails. Everybody wrote, and they all wanted to talk about their favorite beer that they drank growing up that they can't get anymore. And it became this sensation. It was certainly the most, I think it had to have been the most widely read piece I wrote when I was at the Weekly Standard, which is a little sad. I mean, it makes me think we shouldn't do all of the big slog reporting pieces and just publish rants. No, that would be sort of the opposite of what the Dispatch does. And your piece, Kevin, your reported piece on Springfield got 800 billion views or something. I mean, it is the case that sometimes these deeply reported pieces.
I'm just in my head, I'm playing back Steve Hayes talking about how to sexy up a story after talking about listening to 6-month-old podcasts from the Louisiana Farm Bureau.
Sometimes you just have to lead with a topic like that to demonstrate that we're very serious about our non-clickbait approach to news and analysis.
Yeah, that's just.
I learned a lot. I found those. I found those podcasts very entertaining. I may actually continue to listen to some of those podcasts because I
did a speech for the Illinois Farm Bureau a couple years ago, and talking to those guys was fascinating.
Fantastic, absolutely.
And like one of the things I really took away from it was the degree to which you just don't want to have a single megapolis city in your state. Like, if you have a couple, fine, or you have a couple medium-sized ones, fine. But Chicago is so dominant in the state that the farmers feel permanently aggrieved because they just do not have the political clout. And they gave me a stat. I don't know if it's entirely true, but they said something like, on a clear day, something like 60% of the population of Illinois can see the Sears Tower. Just to show you how dense the population is around Chicago. And by dense, you mean?
That too.
Population density. I know you got this Wisconsin thing going on here, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. We can cut that. So.
No, we shouldn't cut that. That's great. Yeah, no, I spoke to a farm group last spring, I think, and it was and fantastic, including a number of longtime Dispatch members. So it was great, very rewarding. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of the Dispatch podcast. Please join us again next week.
You should probably wait just a minute. I've got a garage door going off that's going to destroy it. Okay, do it now.